On Wednesday, May 10th, World Uyghur Congress, a CIA-funded, terrorist-adjacent group, crashed a Volkswagen shareholders meeting, holding signs with unfounded claims about forced labor in Xinjiang. Reuters called them human rights activists, which is interesting considering the World Uyghur Congress, or the WUC, supports the East Turkestan Islamic movement. ETIM is a radical Islamic terrorist group that has committed over 200 attacks on Chinese and Uyghur people. More on that later. Let's take a look at the Reuters article. The headline is, Volkswagen defends China record at turbulent shareholder meeting. There are plenty of ways to criticize Volkswagen that don't involve yellow peril fear-mongering. For instance, they were quite literally created by Hitler and the Nazis during World War II. They used slave labor from Nazi concentration camps to build the first generation of their Beetle vehicle. That's right, Volkswagen did, at least at one point, use slave labor, but it's quite clear that they are not currently using slave labor in Xinjiang. Keeping up with the Nazi angle, you could also criticize VW for when their CEO used a Nazi slogan at a company meeting. Or how about that scandal where they were caught cheating on diesel emission tests, adding more pollution to this dying world? Well, unfortunately, the CIA doesn't give a shit about that. They only care about furthering their Cold War propaganda efforts against China and fattening defense contractor wallets by creating an enemy to fearmonger over. About 10 activists, including one topless woman with dirty money painted on her back, interrupted executive speeches, shouting that the carmakers' vehicles were built with forced labor and waving banners that read, "End Uyghur Forced Labor." Of course the World Uyghur Congress wants you to think that China is forcing the Uyghurs to work for Volkswagen. They're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. The NED founder in 1991 admitted to the Washington Post that the National Endowment for Democracy exists to do overtly what the CIA used to do covertly. The CIA loves to manufacture consent about China. They've been doing it for many decades now. In 2020, the NED bragged about giving almost $9 million to Uyghur activist groups, including the World Uyghur Congress. You can read more about the imperialist efforts of the National Endowment for Democracy on my Substack article. The United Nations said last year that China's arbitrary and discriminatory detention of Uyghurs and other Muslims in its Xinjiang region may constitute crimes against humanity. Rights groups have documented abuses, including mass forced labor in detention camps, which China has denied. Notice the key word there? May constitute crimes against humanity. These claims are wholly unproven. The latest UN report could not even conclusively determine if China was even committing human rights violations, let alone the genocide that the CIA and CIA-funded organizations like the World Uyghur Congress love to claim. Here's a snippet from the World Uyghur Congress's press release on this incident. Volkswagen continues to maintain its controversial plant in the Uyghur region of China. The catastrophic human rights situation there is well documented. In internment camps, millions of Uyghurs and members of other Turkic peoples are indoctrinated, tortured, and raped. Increasingly, factories are being built next to these camps where detainees are forced to perform forced labor at cheap wages. Well documented? Is it though? They use the millions claim that was parroted by Adrian Zenz, a CIA-funded, far-right Christo-fascist that says God sent him to Earth to westernize China. Indoctrinated? Tortured? Raped? According to who? The WUC press release does not source these claims, so let's take a look at one of the reports from their website to see who they are sourcing. Since April 2017, over 1 million Uyghurs have been rounded up by Chinese police and detained against their will in large internment camps, called re-education camps by the Chinese government, where they have been subjected to arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, political indoctrination, torture, and other serious human rights violations. This report has 11 references at the bottom. 6 of them lead directly to Radio Free Asia. You know, the organization that was started by the CIA during the Cold War to propagandize about China and America's other enemies. The Radio Free Asia wiki page says Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia were later preserved by the Clinton administration and repurposed into their modern iterations. They don't try to hide it. They don't really need to for some reason. Westerners just tend to take what Radio Free Asia says about China and also North Korea at face value. Curious what source those RFA references use? Here they are, all 6 of them. According to a security official with knowledge of the detention system, sources familiar with the situation recently told RFA, according to a local fireman, a resident of Xinjiang who spoke on condition of anonymity told RFA, according to officers who answered the phone at the Tomostang police station, a source recently told RFA's Uyghur service, speaking on condition of anonymity. There's not a single shred of tangible evidence for any of these claims. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen a Radio Free Asia report that had a tangible source in it. They always use anonymous, unnamed sources. We're supposed to believe that an organization operated by the CIA is telling the truth about America's geopolitical enemies, especially when their evidence essentially amounts to, "Trust me, bro." Well, that was 6 out of the 11 sources, right? So what about the other 5? Surely they don't source the CIA, right? Well, one of them is self-referential. It links to a World Uyghur Congress press release about the death of an Uyghur religious leader. It sources Radio Free Asia also. Nice. One is to an article from The Guardian, but guess what? It also sources Radio Free Asia. Oops. Another links to a now defunct page from eastturkestaninfo.com. I pulled up an archive on the Wayback Machine. Here's an excerpt from it. I am an Uyghur reporter at Radio Free Asia in Washington, D.C., USA. I have been working at RFA for 17 years. Best regards, February 2018, America/Washington. Yeah, it's a letter from a 17-year veteran reporter at Radio Free Asia. I also like how it literally signs off from Washington, D.C. All right, 2 chances left to not cite the CIA. Let's see how they do. One of them is a Human Rights Watch article. Let's take a look. Human Rights Watch is an unbiased organization, right? Surely they wouldn't source the CIA. There have also been reports of people being sentenced to prison for more than 10 years for studying or traveling abroad. Chen has also stepped up surveillance of residents already under heightened security measures and an ongoing Strike Hard campaign by employing the latest technologies as well as hiring thousands more security personnel. That was the last paragraph of that Human Rights Watch article. Let's take a look at some of those links. 2 of them lead directly to Radio Free Asia. The third links to a Jamestown Foundation article by Adrian Zenz. Oh, and the Jamestown Foundation? Yeah, it's a Washington, D.C. based think tank that was founded in 1984 as a platform to support Soviet defectors. Its board of directors has historically included a smattering of advisors to U.S. presidents and the former president of Radio Free Europe, which obviously, like Radio Free Asia, is operated by the CIA. So, Human Rights Watch just bends over and spreads for CIA propaganda. Now how about Amnesty International, which is the last reference from that WUC report? The link to Amnesty International is a call for people to send a letter to PRC leader Xi Jinping himself about the 30 or so relatives of former prisoner of conscience Rabia Kadir that are supposedly detained in Xinjiang. Who is Rabia? Well, Amnesty International says Rabia Kadir is one of the best-known Uyghur human rights activists and is a leader at the World Uyghur Congress. Oh, she works for the WUC who authored this report in the first place. They're just referencing themselves through Amnesty International. We already know that the World Uyghur Congress is CIA funded, so yes, Amnesty International also sources a CIA funded organization. We've now established that not just 6 of the references cite Radio Free Asia, but 10 out of 11 do. The 11th is just self-referential, and it refers to the CIA-funded World Uyghur Congress. So out of those 10 Radio Free Asia links, we already analyzed 6 of those articles, and we found that they used anonymous, unnamed sources. And spoiler alert, the rest do the same. There's still no tangible evidence coming from Radio Free Asia. So this WUC report is nonsense. The WUC's claims about 1 million Uyghurs being locked up are based on absolutely nothing. They're CIA propaganda. This is the point of the video where we should probably take a bit of a deeper dive into the World Uyghur Congress, because simply calling them a CIA-backed organization is putting it quite lightly. They actually began operating under a different name, the World Uyghur Youth Congress, the WUYC. Omar Kanat was one of the founders of the World Uyghur Youth Congress. He later went on to work for Radio Free Asia. Both the World Uyghur Youth Congress and the World Uyghur Congress have been accused by China of colluding with the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, or ETIM, to commit terror attacks in Xinjiang and elsewhere in China. The World Uyghur Congress openly admits that they believe that Xinjiang is actually East Turkestan and that China, under Chairman Mao, forcibly annexed it, even though Xinjiang has been part of China since at least the Qing dynasty. The terrorist group ETIM aims to separate Xinjiang from China by any means necessary, including violence against citizens of both Xinjiang and China. That includes Uyghur Muslims. They attack their own. Just take a look at this list from Wikipedia of all the terrorist attacks that ETIM is suspected of doing. They admitted to many of them, and the World Uyghur Congress still supports them, especially when they admit to killing civilians in Tiananmen Square. Interesting parallel there. Now obviously it's just China accusing the World Uyghur Congress of conspiring with ETIM, but we don't need to even get into the nitty-gritty of that, because at the very least, the World Uyghur Congress openly supports ETIM. This Voice of America article shows how happy a member of the World Uyghur Congress was when the US removed ETIM from its terrorist watch list, a move that definitely wasn't ideologically motivated. Supposedly, the US only initially put ETIM on their terrorist watch list to curry favor from China because they needed support for their imperialist invasion of Iraq, which was built upon CIA lies. Kind of like the nonsense that the CIA-funded World Uyghur Congress spreads about China. It comes full circle. An Al Jazeera article about the ETIM removal states, ETIM was removed from the list because, for more than a decade, there has been no credible evidence that ETIM continues to exist, a State Department spokesperson said. Do you know why ETIM would potentially cease to exist? Because China was able to non-violently and successfully de-radicalize the small amount of Uyghur Muslims who were radicalized by East Turkestan nationalist propaganda. The US is mad that China is able to deal with Islamic extremism in a mostly peaceful way, so they make up lies and accuse China of doing what the US actually does to Muslims around the world. Not so fun fact, 22 Uyghurs were imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay after 9/11. This is the Wikipedia article about it. You know, it's really interesting to look through this with its wealth of tangible evidence and compare it to what the US says about China. Want another fun fact? Rushan Abbas was the interpreter for these 22 Uyghurs at Gitmo. She was a US State Department goon and also happened to be the first Uyghur service reporter at Radio Free Asia. In 2017, she founded the Campaign for Uyghurs organization, which is another National Endowment for Democracy / CIA-funded Uyghur advocacy organization. She did a Reddit AMA once to try to spread anti-China propaganda, and she was torn to shreds by people in the comments for her State Department and Radio Free Asia affiliations. Guess what? Campaign for Uyghurs works closely with the World Uyghur Congress to spread lies about China. You can see examples here, here, and here. Once again, full circle. Now, hopefully at this point, we understand why nothing that the World Uyghur Congress says about China, Xinjiang, or the Uyghurs can be trusted. Now let's loop back to the basis of this video, which is Volkswagen's apparent use of forced labor in Xinjiang. Volkswagen has been faced with these allegations for years. They wanted to investigate for themselves and prove that there was no forced labor in their Xinjiang plant. So they sent an exec over there. And guess what? They found zero evidence of forced labor because there is none. The guy even went unannounced, so they couldn't prepare in advance for it. From the Reuters article, China Chief Ralph Brandstatter said, "We do not see any evidence of human rights abuses at the plant," adding that the carmaker was not able to implement an audit without agreement from SAIC. Brandstatter visited the plant earlier this year and said on Wednesday, "I have no reason to doubt my impressions or the information available to me." Perhaps the World Uyghur Congress should complain about the human rights violations committed by their favorite terrorist group, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement. They should probably do that instead of making up shit about China. It's quite clear that China's treatment of the Uyghurs is fair and balanced, especially compared to what certain countries like the US do to Muslims around the world. For instance, this. Should we listen to CIA-funded organizations like the World Uyghur Congress about what goes on in Xinjiang? Or should we listen to the 30 diplomats from Muslim-majority countries who visited Xinjiang and praised China on their treatment of the Uyghur Muslims? Gee, I wonder. Now, like this video and subscribe to this channel, or I'll designate you as a terrorist organization.